So, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the meeting with the Development Committee. Members have received the result of the first round of voting on the draft opinions on, firstly, the Sustainable Fisheries Partnership Agreement between the EU and Mauritania. Final vote we will have now on the consent opinion and vote on amendments to the non-legislative opinion. Secondly, we got the result from the Sustainable Fisheries Partnership Agreement between the EU and the Cook Islands, final vote on the consent opinion, and the future of EU-Africa trade relations, where we had vote on amendments. We will proceed to the final vote on the draft non-legislative opinions as amended, and we will have the same procedure as for the first voting round. So what we need to do now is to try to verify the quorum. So, if you are connected remotely, you can please push the button, request the floor button on your screen now.
Yes, we have it.
So, thank you. We have the quorum, and I now declare the vote open. The vote closes at 10 o'clock, so please make sure that your emails reach the functional mailbox before that time at the latest. The result of the final votes will be announced in writing. All results will be published, as usual, in the minutes of today's meeting. So, colleagues, our first substantial item this morning is an exchange of views with the European Commission and humanitarian organizations on the situation in Ukraine following Russia's illegal and unjust invasion of the country. Everyone is aware of the catastrophic humanitarian impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and of the appalling human rights and violations and violence committed by the Russian troops against civilians. Furthermore, since the beginning of the war, there have been deliberate efforts by Russia to prevent safe and unimpeded access for humanitarian organizations and to block safe passage for civilian evacuations of cities under siege, in what constitutes clear violations of international humanitarian law. The implementation of the war against Ukraine are wide-ranging, and the DEVA Committee continues to examine the different angles of this. Earlier this month, we discussed the situation of refugees and displaced people with the LIBE Committee. And later today, we will look into the impact of the war in Ukraine on global food security. For this agenda item, we want to find out more about the humanitarian situation inside Ukraine. To do this, we have invited representatives from DJ ECHO and from humanitarian organizations to present on the ground, the NGO people in need, and the International Committee of the Red Cross. Furthermore, we will also have an intervention from our counterpart in the Ukrainian Parliament, Mr. Mykola Potorajev, Chair of the Committee on Humanitarian and Information Policy of the Ukrainian Verkhovna Rada. A very well welcome to our committee, Mr. Potorajev, and thank you for taking the time to address the member on this important issue. In light of the limited time for the debates, I will now, without further delay, pass the floor to our guests before opening the debate for members. So we will start by giving the floor to Mr. Mykola Potorajev, Chair of the Committee on Humanitarian and Information Policy of the Ukrainian Verkhovna Rada. So, please, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, colleagues, for the invitation. I will very briefly describe you the general humanitarian situation in Ukraine. So, for now, as you know, more than 3 million of Ukrainians are refugees in Europe. More than 7 million are internal refugees in Ukraine, and the number is increasing because of evacuation from Kharkiv and Donetsk and Luhansk and Zaporozhye regions, where war operations became much more active for today because of new phase of Russian invasion to Ukraine. As for educational institutions, 1,071 severed from invasion, 95 are destroyed fully. 300 medical institutions also severed from invasion. Among them, 21 are destroyed fully. 230 cultural institutions or cultural objects are destroyed or severely suffered from invasion. 578 children suffered, among them 2,005 killed, and 373 children were wounded. Unfortunately, a larger part of them severely wounded. 500,000 of Ukrainian citizens were deported from Ukraine to Russian Federation without any agreement from their side. And unfortunately, there is no opportunity for now even contact with these people. So that's by the way one of the possible directions of Red Cross activity, at least to find these deported people and to understand what is going with them on the territory of Russian Federation, because we know about so-called filtration camps for Ukrainian citizens and other violations of their human rights and freedoms. So this is what is happening. You also probably have heard that we've terminally lost a third part of our agricultural fields. And you probably also are informed that we'll have serious problems with logistics for our crops this year. So I only would like to stress, dear colleagues, that it's not a case when someone can ask Ukraine to make some steps onto Russian proposals because of potential risk of global hunger. It's not our case, colleagues. So if someone in some international organization, in some of international organizations, has any ideas or dreams that Ukraine can be pressed to go on Russian conditions. So, sorry, we're not responsible for the risks of global hunger. The only country which is responsible is Russian Federation. And I think that all countries that are interested in preventing the risks of possible global hunger can use all their efforts to press a Russian Federation, not Ukraine, as you probably understand my and not only mine position. This was very short remark for the beginning. I think that from these remarks you can understand the scale of problems that Ukraine is facing, and Europe is facing, and the world is facing. And the main thing I think that civilized world should concentrate in its efforts for now is to help Ukraine to win in this war, not to stop this war, but to help Ukraine to win in this war, because victory in this war means solution for all problems that I've mentioned and you've heard about. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Potorajev, and thank you also for being so clear. And of course, you should know, and on behalf of the Development Committee, that of course we stand behind you in your, of course, your right to stand up against the Russian aggression and this invasion. And of course, there is no one to blame except Russia for this situation. And of course, you will not hear any messages from the European Parliament that would say that Ukraine in any circumstances should be pressed to accept any Russian condition at this stage. But of course, also for our committee and our focus on humanitarian needs, of course, as you say, on the first hand, it's about the war, and Ukraine needs to prevail and need to win this war. But of course, also, we need to do whatever we can under these circumstances and try to do what we can to make the conditions as good as possible on humanitarian areas. Okay, we will move on now to other guests, and I will now go to the ECHO representatives, and I will then give the floor to Alessandro Valambrini, who is Deputy Head of the Unit Southeast Europe and Eastern Neighborhood at DG ECHO, and Yorgos Kapranis, Field Expert at DG ECHO. You have 8 minutes in total, and I think you're connected remotely. Or you are even here now, I see. Oh, perfect.
Yes, good morning, everybody. I will make a quick introduction and then I will give the floor to my colleague Yorgos from Lviv. The European Commission is working on all fronts to support Ukraine and its people with emergency assistance. This includes both humanitarian aid and civil protection assistance. We, of course, continue to reiterate that all obligations under international humanitarian law must be respected above all. Civilians cannot be a target, and safe and unhindered humanitarian access to people in need must be guaranteed. And the blatant and widespread IHL violations that we are observing every day are simply unacceptable. The Commission has pledged €1 billion in the recent Stand Up for Ukraine event for people fleeing the Russian invasion, including inside Ukraine and abroad. In terms of humanitarian aid, this includes 143 million of humanitarian funding in response to the war in Ukraine, respectively 130 million for Ukraine and 13 million for Moldova, which is, of course, a country that is strongly affected by the Ukrainian crisis. And this funding, this humanitarian aid funding for external EU countries, is implemented by humanitarian partner organizations such as UN agencies, the Red Cross, and the international non-governmental organizations, so the humanitarian partners. The Commission has currently a team of humanitarian experts in the field to support the operation and to visit the territory. We have at present 5 people in Ukraine and 3 people in Moldova, and the ECHO presence in the ground is vital to work with the partners, monitor the situation, and really understand what are the most urgent needs to address. And our strategy is a two-pronged operational approach, I would say. First, DG ECHO provides life-saving emergency assistance to conflict-affected people stranded in heavily shelled and besieged cities or hard-to-reach areas, including in the east, where now we see the most dire humanitarian conditions. And then, of course, DG ECHO in the center and in the west support also through its partners IDPs affected and IDPs, internally displaced people that are flowing to the west and the center of Ukraine. And indeed, on our field presence and to have some more concrete observations from the field, I would like now to give the floor to the ECHO coordinator for the humanitarian crisis, Yorgos Kapranis, which is connected from Lviv.
Good morning, colleagues. Yes, I arrived to Lviv yesterday from Kiev. After the attack in Kiev, our colleagues, the ECO office, has moved temporarily to Moldova. And on the 22nd of March, I arrived with a team of around 10 people. We opened our presence, and we have been doing assessments and talking to partners and government officials inside Ukraine. We have been in several locations on the west, in Vinnytsia, in Chernivtsi, in Khmelnytsky, in Zhytomyr, in Kovel, in Kiev, of course. From there, we moved east to Dnipro, to Poltava, to Okhtirka, Zaporizhia, Odessa. As we speak, I have 3 colleagues that are visiting operations to see the situation in Mykolaiv. Hopefully, all will go well. There's no words to describe in places in the east that have been hit by the conflict, the destruction, the level of vulnerability that exists, the human dramas that we are witnessing when we are talking to the people that have escaped under the bombs, or are trying to return right now to the newly liberated areas, and they witness the destruction of the homes they left behind. Humanitarian workers and humanitarian agencies are working hand in hand with the government. We have to acknowledge and we have to salute that the exceptional coordination we're having with the local government, the government at the central level, but also the myriads of Ukrainian volunteers and civil society that have been active at the very, very beginning, opening their houses, helping on their free time all the more than 7 million people that have been displaced inside the country. I am happy to see that there is a presence and an activity of humanitarian workers working together with the local authorities in all of these places that I mentioned where we have been. We are focusing on emergency response. We're focusing on actions that have a quick impact, like cash assistance, for example, where people are getting on their bank accounts direct cash that they can spend in the local economy, which is the best way also to support Ukraine and revitalize local economy. More than 150,000 people have received cash to date. It will take place on a monthly basis, and thousands more are being registered every day. In the areas under government control, we have access to the people. There is access to basic services. The government systems are working extremely well, and they're taking care of the population. And what we are trying is to support the areas that have received additional displaced people and support the access to these basic services and make sure that the systems continue to function. We are not trying to build any parallel systems. The objective is to support and fill the gaps of the national response. However, in areas that are either on the conflict line, where people are actually trying to flee in humanitarian corridors, and even worse, even more important, in the areas that are that are occupied currently, this is where the emergency needs are. This is where human dramas take place every day, and this is where we have to fight for access on every day. There is a big problem with safe access for humanitarian workers and convoys to arrive in these areas, to bring assistance to the people that are stuck there, and also give the opportunity to people to live if they wish so. It is very, very problematic. We are only reaching, I would say, a fraction of the needs. And this is unfortunately linked to the ongoing conflict and the lack of ceasefires to allow humanitarian corridors. This is really something that would have a huge and direct impact on the well-being and even the lives of thousands of people in these areas. And this is something that we would expect we would expect the European Parliament and all the diplomatic ways to maintain the pressure on Russia to allow this access. The other thing that I can say that I have only witnessed, and now since I'm addressing the European Parliament, I have also witnessed in every places where we have gone, the warehouses where the government is collecting all the donations coming from Europe and other parts of the world. These are donations of individual citizens, of small groups, but I have also witnessed the donations that are coming through the member states, through the EU, the European Union Civil Protection Mechanism. They arrive, they're in place, they're being used, and they're highly appreciated by the authorities. They have always thanked when I showed up in the meetings with the authorities. They have always thanked and understand and appreciate the efforts and the solidarity that was being sent by European citizens. And I can only say that this should continue, not of course in the only in-kind donations that was the early days, but with sustainable funding to maintain and even increase the humanitarian operations that are so needed today for the people of Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We will now move on, and I will give the floor to Mr. Marek Stys, who is Head of Emergency Programs for People in Need. 5 minutes, and you're connected remotely. Please, you have the floor.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for inviting us to this session. I will speak from a position of an international humanitarian NGO which has been present in Donbass since 2014 on both sides of the contact line. After the invasion, we managed to regroup in Lviv and re-establish our relations with the national partners, mostly in eastern Ukraine, and reprogram and relaunch the assistance. I have to say this is to a great support of our key donors, including ECHO, and we also had a great response in our private fundraising efforts. In Czech Republic only, we have fundraised an unprecedented 70 million euros so far. We have also opened programs in Romania, Moldova, and Czech Republic for the refugees, but our maximum focus is really on the assistance inside Ukraine where the needs are. So how do we see the development of the humanitarian needs and what PIN is actually doing? The situation is still very fluid and developing as we speak, so we cannot be certain on how the next phase of the Russian military invasion will be and what sort of humanitarian needs it will bring. We deal with a very complex population movement, including the internally displaced people, refugees, and returning populations. And we see that the situation in most of the part is still too volatile for a sustainable and safe return. Obviously, shelter and housing in general will be one of the key priority and key need, and alternative housing solutions and arrangements and preparations for the next winter should start basically now. We see the access to water as absolutely critical and growing issue, and particularly for the city population. This is the same dynamics we used to see in Donbass many years ago. And there are obviously critical needs in health sector all across the country, and I would like to stress the mental health issue due to the absolutely large level of trauma among the population. So we are looking at a set of very, very basic needs in large parts of the country. What my organization is doing, we are directly supporting the displaced population in so-called collective centers with material and food aid. And also, as has been mentioned, we are scaling up the multi-purpose cash assistance, aiming currently at 80,000 beneficiaries in the next 2 months. And it's important to underline that we are really trying to strengthen and not to create a parallel schemes to the existing government schemes. For example, we are under the discussion with Ministry of Social Policy for a complementary financial support for the most vulnerable disabled population at the moment. Unfortunately, in many areas, the markets are largely dysfunctional, so we cannot use cash. So the largest part of our response so far has focused on food and material aid. We organized a stable shipment of food and critical non-food items from Prague. We have dispatched so far 12 trains, roughly 5,000 metric tons of aid to Lviv, Kiev, but mostly to Dnipro, from where it is distributed further on by our partners on the trucks. And this is including the convoys to hard-to-reach areas as Sumy, Severodonetsk, Kherson, and others. In this regard, we are trying to utilize and maximize the capacities of the local civil society. So we have established a granting system to local partners, so far distributed around 140 grants, mostly in eastern Ukraine. And this is exactly supporting our partners' work, which is critical and critically important for so-called last mile of delivery in these critical areas. PIN also continues water tracking in many locations of Donbass, we are continuing with psychosocial assistance, but I don't want to go into too many details. So far, in the first 6 weeks after the invasion, we served approximately 200,000 beneficiaries inside Ukraine. I would like to mention a few issues and advocacy links related to aid delivery. The first one is obviously the protection of civilians, and we need a maximum diplomatic effort and pressure on Russia to stop attacking the civilians and purely civilian targets. We see how Mariupol and indiscriminate shelling of other cities is becoming of a symbol of these blatant breaches of international humanitarian law in the same way as Grozny, Aleppo in the past. And related to this, of course, there's big concern of the security of our own staff, of the aid workers, and of the staff of our partner organizations working in these areas. Secondly, this is already mentioned, the issues around the access and evacuation. So we crucially need to work and push for the establishment of the green corridors, at first to allow the people out. And I have to stress that the evacuation has to be voluntarily and have to be particularly safe. And I'm referring to these horrific attacks on the evacuation convoys, which has been documented. And the second purpose of these green corridors is obviously to let the aid and aid workers in order to provide the assistance. For us, it is extremely important that OCHA continues negotiating on this, but unfortunately, at the moment, the situation is that we have the capacities on the ground, we have the goods on the ground, but we cannot deliver the assistance and we cannot deliver it safely into these most needed locations. In the relations with the Ukrainian government, we have a great cooperation on all the levels. We are discussing particularly two issues worth of attention, which is a clear distinguishment between the humanitarian and military aid. Our own organization had two issues with some trains confiscated, which we had to negotiate back. It was sorted out, but such incidents can delay and jeopardize the overall aid delivery. And the second are the issues around the military conscriptions, and we continued the discussion with the government that the humanitarian workers should be exempted from the conscriptions, because otherwise it would be impossible to operate. But this issue is fortunately under the discussion. Lastly, I wanted to mention the issue of the impact of the war in Ukraine on the other crisis regions, as Middle East or Horn of Africa, speaking of the countries like Syria, Lebanon, Ethiopia, Yemen, or even Afghanistan. You are well aware of this, but we see growing prices of the basic food commodities, and the prediction is that if Ukrainian and Russia production is falling by, let's say, 40%, we might see 400 million people going hungry globally. I stop here. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm open to any questions later on.
Thank you. Move on now, and I give the floor to Ms. Alexandra Boivin, who is head of Ukraine Crisis Team at the International Committee of the Red Cross. 5 minutes, please.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation to take part in this discussion this morning. Let me first begin by mentioning that the International Committee of the Red Cross is at the origin of the Geneva Conventions and the Red Cross movement, and that states have given us a specific mandate to act in the event of international armed conflict based on the Geneva Conventions. In particular, the ICRC has the right to visit prisoners of war and civilian internees. And I mention this by way of introduction in order to be clear about the ICRC's commitment to both assist the people affected by this conflict, but also maintain a very robust engagement with the parties on respect for international humanitarian law. I also mention this in order to emphasize the importance of neutrality in order to perform the mandate that we've been given by states. We have been working in Ukraine since 2014. Ukraine has been indeed one of our top 10 operations for a number of years. Currently, we have more than 600 colleagues on staff, including close to 200 or so international staff that we had to extract from different operations worldwide to be able to surge on this response. We have maintained a presence in Luhansk and Donetsk, and we have set up a number of additional teams as close as possible to the front lines. In Ukraine, it is important to know that we work hand in hand with the Ukrainian Red Cross Society as well as many other Red Cross societies. As has been well expressed already by other speakers this morning, the needs are enormous and the operating environment is very challenging. While the levels of insecurity vary across the country, there are people who need assistance everywhere. In terms of what we're delivering, let me just give you a few elements, emphasizing the cash assistance that has already mentioned by other speakers, but remains, of course, critical in this context, especially to support the huge numbers of internally displaced persons. We also are in conversation with the Ministry of Social Policy to agree an MOU in this respect. Let me also then mention the medical response and speak to the constant evacuations that are being conducted of vulnerable and wounded in areas most acutely affected by the conflict. Speak about also numerous donations of medical equipment, including war-wounded kits, as well as medicine in order to be able to ensure the continuity of care for patients with non-communicable diseases in areas where we have been engaged since 2014. It was already mentioned before, but I need to say it again, the mental health needs of the population are acute, and it is our responsibility to support the authorities in responding to those needs. I also wanted to mention essential infrastructure because this is a big part of our response, addressing the consequences of damage to vital infrastructure and the resulting disruptions of supply of water, electricity, gas, working hand in hand with the authorities to restore those services is a key part of our response. On IDPs, our focus has been on Dnipro and Lviv. For now, working on supporting shelters together with Red Cross partners, but also host families who bear the burden of this reality. Let me now pivot to our protection dialogue because I think it's an important feature of our work to build and maintain a dialogue with the parties to the conflict in order to get access to all people involved, in order to have the security guarantees, of course, to be able to do the work that has been mentioned here, the necessity of being able to do safe passage operations, but also to raise in a very direct way concerns about respect for international humanitarian law. I would mention our work on detention in terms of seeking to access prisoners of war, but also registering people who are detained and identifying people who have died so that we're able to provide answers to families. That's a big part of our work. As you may know, we have the central tracing agency up and running for this conflict with a dedicated bureau precisely for this purpose. And the work we do now will also help prevent decades of work further in the future to find answers for families who are still looking for their loved ones or wanting to find out what happened to them during the conflict. On the protection of civilians, couldn't agree more about the centrality of this issue and the need for a dialogue on this question and for advocacy on this point. It is important for you to also know that the Red Cross needs to distinguish itself from those who are involved in criminal justice proceedings so that we're able to continue to do our work. Finally, on safe passage, I'm happy to answer questions on that. But again, beyond the obligation of the parties to make this happen, we have found it, and I think this was very eloquently said by our colleague from ECHO, it has become extremely challenging to find any kind of agreement between the parties. We are nevertheless continuing to work on this and have deployed significant resources to find solutions to this issue. Mindful of the time, let me perhaps conclude with a huge amount of appreciation to the European Union on two fronts. First, for the generous financial support that we get for our operations in Ukraine, but second, for recently introducing humanitarian exemptions into sanctions regime in relation to the conflict. This is a very important step taken, and we intend to continue to engage with European institutions and member states on this matter. Open to your question. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now open up the floor for the political groups, and we will start with EPP. Jörgen Helvin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Thomas. Two short remarks. I'm really happy about that. Finally, we have this humanitarian aspect in Ukraine. Everybody's Admiral Nelson in the press, but we have to focus on it, and I'm very happy that we are our group or committees on the front line of this issue. And secondly, as I mentioned, our group, that we created inside the EPP a monitoring group concerning the Ukraine issue and as well as the humanitarian monitoring. And our member, Rasa Yuknavici, she is the vice president of the EPP, but parallel is a member here. That means that we have daily based information about the situation inside the group. The second thing, this was very interesting, mentioned by Mr. Marek Stisch. Yeah, that's he mentioned Aleppo. Almost we forgotten Aleppo. Yeah, and it was a parallel. We can realize more and more parallelities, what's going on and what's happened in Syria, and we heard about in Aleppo, and today we have some parallelities, for example, in Mariupol. And we will have Mosul in Ukraine, and we have to recognize this situation to make concrete. Many for this to mention the tragical parallelities from Mr. Stisch. To the topic, I would like to highlight specific. It was mentioned by Mr. Poturayev, but I would like this aspect of the war, the situation of the children and the education. Yeah, and 5.5 million school-age children remain in Ukraine are potentially losing access to the education, potentially, currently, leading to the long-term consequences. It's really a concrete question. It's formulated. As far as we know, in the western part of Ukraine, there is still relative calm. The environment is the possibility to enroll these children in the schools in Ukraine. This is a very concrete issue. What are the specific needs for this? And I don't speak about they are already abroad. 100,000 of children are abroad, yeah? How long? What? How? Integration, not integration. Teachers, not teachers. This is the question. And additionally of this 5.5 million children, they are 5.5 million refugees are 1.5 million children. This is totally absurd. The last but not least, I would like to raise the question, the access to the humanitarian issue. We have seen the reports of the different really horrific action performed by the Russian troops, and we have learned the humanitarian convoys are prevented to reach their destination. And really concretely, maybe from the representative, the Red Cross, or from the PINP, is there any positive development or humanitarian support can reach the western part of Ukraine, but how can we deliver the assistance to the central and the eastern part? This is really a logistical question, but absolutely crucial question. Many thanks.
Thank you. I give the floor now to S&D, Carsten Lucke.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender. Neben den schrecklichen Kriegsbildern und auch den Kriegsverbrechen, die wir sehen, das ist angesprochen worden, ist natürlich die humanitäre Situation in der Ukraine besonders bedrückend und macht uns natürlich auch besonders fassungslos. Ich habe diesbezüglich dann 3 konkrete Fragen, die mir auch immer wieder in den Gesprächen mit den Bürgerinnen und Bürgern begegnen. Deswegen möchte ich die ganz gerne auch wieder mit nach Hause nehmen. Und eine der banalsten Feststellungen am Ende des Tages ist immer, Geld ist endlich. Das haben wir oft festgestellt. Und die vorhandenen Finanzmittel, nach meiner Kenntnis, gehen natürlich irgendwann zu Ende. Und auch innerhalb des EU-Haushaltes wird es keine Möglichkeiten mehr zu Verschiebungen geben. Von daher stellt sich für mich die Frage, wie stellt sich die Situation in den kommenden Wochen, Monaten weiter dar. Das heißt, brauchen wir weitere Geberkonferenzen? Wie sind wir da aufgestellt? Kann man zu dieser Situation was sagen, wie tatsächlich hier das finanzielle Engagement auch für die nächsten Monate und Wochen dargestellt werden muss. Und vielleicht als Fußnote hier auch nochmal die Frage, die mich interessieren würde, können wir im Rahmen von Geberbereitschaft auch durch Transparenz etwas erreichen, fernab von wirtschaftlichen Geschichten bei einzelnen Mitgliedstaaten, um auch da ein bisschen mehr in Richtung Gebertum zu erreichen. Der zweite Punkt, der mich interessieren würde, ist auch da die Feststellung, Krieg bedeutet immer Hunger. Wir werden ja gleich im nächsten Item auch noch über die globalen Auswirkungen sprechen, aber mich würde hier auch noch mal ganz konkret, und es wurde ja auch teilweise schon angesprochen, für die Ukraine das interessieren. Und wenn ich hier ein paar Bullet Points sozusagen einfach mal aufrufe, fehlende Arbeitskräfte, zerstörte Traktoren, landwirtschaftliches Gerät, zerstörte Getreidevorräte, kaputtgeschossene, zerbombte Silos, diese Liste könnte man sicherlich unendlich fortsetzen mit den entsprechenden Auswirkungen. Und von daher wird es tendenziell natürlich auch immer noch weitergehen zu einer größeren Verschärfung hier kommen. Deswegen diese ganz konkrete Ernährungssituation in der Ukraine, vielleicht da noch mal ein, zwei Punkte zuzuhören und vor allen Dingen, welche Hilfsmöglichkeiten wir tatsächlich haben und in der Tendenz, wie auch hier die Projektion dann in die Zukunft aussieht und welche Stellschrauben wir drehen können. Und als letztes, das ist wirklich eine Wissensfrage, weil ich darüber gestolpert bin. Wir wissen ja, das haben wir schon seit Wochen jetzt verfolgt, dass bei den Geflüchteten bis zu 90% tatsächlich Männer, Frauen und Kinder diejenigen sind, die flüchten. Und in Kriegen ist es immer so, dass dann auch genderbasierte Gewalt natürlich eine Rolle spielt. Und ich bin über dieses Thema Menschenhandel gestoßen, bin aber nicht weiter schlau geworden hier tatsächlich. Deswegen eine sehr offene Frage an diesem Punkt. Kann mir irgendjemand sagen, in welchem Umfang findet das tatsächlich statt? Ist das ein virulentes Thema? Gibt es hier in irgendeiner Art und Weise Erkenntnisse, die wir auch natürlich dann politisch behandeln müssen? Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you. Give the floor now to Renew. Barry Andrews.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all those who've given evidence this morning. So just very specific questions which I'd like to raise. First of all, with the ICRC, you heard the evidence from the Ukraine MP that 500,000 people have been deported, obviously without permission, and no contact has been possible with the 500,000 Ukrainians that were deported to Russia. Now, the ICRC have set up an office in Rostov in the Russian territory, across the border from Ukraine. Would the speaker from the ICRC be able to tell us if she has any information or whether that office set up very controversially has been able to provide any evidence to support the what has been said by the Ukraine MP? Can she confirm that 500,000 people have been deported from Ukraine? Has any contact been made? And what is the purpose of this office in Rostov? And secondly, on the access question, lots of evidence to be given this morning about the difficulty of access into eastern Ukraine. Does the office in Rostov-on-Don provide an opportunity for the ICRC to have engagement with the Russian regime on access to difficult-to-reach areas in eastern Ukraine? Third question is on humanitarian exceptions to the conscription question, that is for humanitarian workers. And this is a question for the MP from Ukraine, Mr. Puterev. Does he agree that humanitarian aid workers should enjoy an exception from the conscription regime that is currently in place for the Ukraine armed forces? Should such an exception apply? Does it apply in practice? I'd appreciate his insight in this regard. And finally, on the question of programming, on cash, I know that DG ECHO have given evidence this morning that they have reached now 150,000 people with cash programming. It seems to me to be very low, almost 2 months into this crisis, that only 150,000 people out of the many millions of IDPs are now enjoying cash assistance, particularly in western and central Ukraine, where markets are operational, where banks are operational, where this should be much more widespread. And I think the last speaker made a very good point about the difficulty of EU funding and trying to redirect this at this particular time. Nevertheless, it does seem to me a very low number, and perhaps he could give further elaboration. Thank you.
Thank you. We move on then to the Greens. I give the floor to Vice Chair Piret Hesberger Fofana.
voilà, oui, allô, vous me voyez, vous m'entendez? Allô? Allô? Vous m'entendez? Ah bon, alors ça va. Donc la crise la crise en Ukraine a eu donc des conséquences inéluctables dans le domaine surtout de l'éducation. Mes préoccupations vont aussi aux étudiants étrangers qui ont été donc victimes de cette crise et qui ne bénéficient pas aussi des mêmes privilèges pour poursuivre leurs études dans les pays d'accueil, comme me l'a assuré aussi le président de l'université de ma ville à la suite de la lettre que je lui avais adressée. Et j'aimerais savoir quelles mesures ont été prises pour tous les étudiants qui ont dû interrompre leurs études. Qu'est-ce que cela signifie pour notre partenariat avec l'Afrique? Y a-t-il une association d'universités ou un collège d'Europe qui peuvent aider à l'innovation en ce qui concerne l'enseignement en ligne afin de permettre aux étudiants qui étaient en fin d'études de les achever? Un autre sujet qui me préoccupe aussi, c'est la violence contre les femmes. C'est d'autant plus que je suis le rapporteur de notre projet sur l'impact de la violence sur les femmes en Ukraine. J'aimerais savoir si vous avez des rapports, des dates surtout en ce qui concerne le nombre de femmes qui ont pu être malheureusement violées et qui ont été donc victimes de violences. J'ai aussi une question pour les ONG. Quelles sont donc vos expériences avec les communautés marginalisées? Qu'en est-il des enfants orphelins issus de couples biculturels et les personnes transgenres? Et je pense que nous avons notre volonté, c'est surtout de pouvoir aider afin que tous ces jeunes ne voient pas leur avenir bouché, et notre solidarité doit être donc totale compte tenu de l'importance que nous accordons donc à l'éducation. Voilà, merci.
Okay. Then I will give the floor to ECR. I see that we have, I don't know, Beata Kempa is not connected up. Perhaps I can give the floor to Ryszard Sarnecki for ECR, please.
Bardzo dziękuję, panie przewodniczący. To bardzo ważna debata i cieszę się, że do niej dochodzi. Ja bardzo krótko. Po pierwsze, taka informacja i odpowiedź częściowa na pytanie mojej przedmówczyni, pani europoseł Herzberger-Fofana. Mianowicie, ja nie wiem, jak to jest, gdy chodzi o Słowację czy Mołdawię, ale gdy chodzi o Polskę, to kilkuset studentów z Indii, kilkuset z Pakistanu i kilkuset z Turcji, którzy studiowali na Ukrainie, zostali polskimi samolotami przetransportowani do New Delhi, do Karachi i do Ankary czy Istambułu, nie wiem dokładnie, a więc no, tutaj nasz kraj udzielił maksymalnej pomocy. Natomiast mam jedno pytanie. Nie wiedziałem, że one jest bardzo zbliżone do tego, co mówił pan europoseł Andrews. Chodzi mi o kwestię pracowników humanitarnych, bo rzeczywiście mamy do czynienia z gigantyczną katastrofą humanitarną. Ona, przepraszam, ale będzie się jeszcze pogłębiać. Ona będzie coraz większa. I w związku z tym sytuacja taka, w której ci pracownicy organizacji humanitarnych muszą służyć w wojsku. Jest to oczywiście dobre z punktu widzenia interesów obronności, no ale z punktu widzenia zapobiegania katastrofie humanitarnej jest to sytuacja trudna. Także będę wdzięczny za informacje w tej sprawie. Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you. Then move on to the left, to Miguel Urban Crespo.
Gracias, presidente. La verdad es que se suele decir que una crisis es una oportunidad, más bien un desafío, un campo de pruebas y en muchos casos una disputa de cómo hacer las cosas. Una crisis humanitaria también es todo esto. Desde nuestro grupo parlamentario reiteramos la bienvenida a la Directiva Temporal de Acogida activada para dar refugio a quienes huyen de la guerra en Ucrania, aunque mantenemos nuestra alerta ante posibles discriminaciones en la atención, como ha denunciado la comunidad romaní. La acogida de todas las personas que huyen de la violencia es el camino y debería marcar el principio de un cambio de paradigma en la política migratoria europea. Pero entendemos que se puede hacer más, especialmente lo relativo a la financiación de la ayuda humanitaria. Y aquí van dos propuestas que hemos realizado desde nuestro grupo parlamentario. La primera es seguir afinando para que las sanciones se dirijan a la oligarquía rusa y no las sufra el conjunto del pueblo ruso, porque hay que decir que eso podría generar futuras crisis humanitarias y la prevención es tan importante como la reacción. Para ello entendemos que es importante que los paraísos fiscales europeos hagan públicas la información sobre quiénes esconden su dinero ahí. Muchos de ellos, no lo olvidemos, son oligarcas rusos y así podríamos confiscar sus bienes. Unos fondos que contribuirían decididamente a financiar la ayuda humanitaria al pueblo ucraniano. Una lástima que hace unos días el Pleno de este Parlamento haya votado en contra de una propuesta como esta. La segunda propuesta consistiría en que los Estados miembros de la Unión Europea y el FMI cancelaran la deuda exterior ucraniana, así como abolir la deuda con Rusia, que supone un 30% del total de la deuda ucraniana. Esto aliviaría enormemente las necesidades financieras de una economía golpeada por la invasión rusa y permitiría destinar más fondos no solo a la financiación de la ayuda humanitaria, sino también a la reconstrucción del país, un elemento clave. Son dos propuestas efectivas, dirigidas a apoyar al pueblo ucraniano y a cortocircuitar la escalada bélica. Su aprobación solo es una cuestión de voluntad política. Mi pregunta a los ponentes es justamente qué opinan de estas propuestas. Incluso a la Comisión es por qué no se han aprobado ya. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. That was all the questions and interventions from the political groups. We will now return for answers and concluding remarks from our guests, and we will start with Chair Rajev. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, colleagues. I will try briefly to cover some questions because there were some problems with translation. Probably I couldn't catch some of questions. The question about access to infrastructure and damages of infrastructure was raised. I can tell you that our specialists are doing their best, even with huge risks for their lives. They come to towns, villages and cities as soon as anti-mining works are ended, and unfortunately they also suffer from mines that were not discovered, but every day we renew access to gas, to electricity, to water, but of course situation still is very hard. But on the territories that were deoccupied, access is renewed, in fact, every day. And more and more people have the access to infrastructure. So education is really a huge problem, and thank you all colleagues that have raised this question. I would say thanks to COVID, we've made huge progress in distant education, and for now all Ukrainian children and students, they have access to distant education inside Ukraine. We also know that a lot of people use this opportunity in European countries, where a lot of children stay now. all graduators exams in schools will be, well, for all children, there will be an access for graduators exams in schools. And so the same is about students. So all school-age children and universities graduates will have an opportunity to get their graduates diplomas. Although, of course, we have problems, and problems not only in this sphere. You know that from financial point of view, the situation in Ukraine is very hard. We are in process of preparing some our asks for support of Ukrainian education, medical system, and culture, because of course, as you can imagine, all our efforts now are concentrated on supporting our army, on supporting people who are in need, to pay pensions, to pay minimum sums of money for people who lost their jobs. Of course, we are trying to cover all our obligations in the field of medical service, of education, cultural needs. But again, we already understand that we will have to ask for support, and we understand that we will have to ask for support from European countries, of course, first of all, who are our closest friends and neighbors. I mean, European Union as a whole, and Europe as a whole. Also, as for delivering aid to Central and Eastern regions, that the question that was raised, look, our volunteers are doing their best, and such help is delivered even in villages and towns which are right now in front zone, on front line. And we unfortunately, every week we have losses among volunteers. But you can be absolutely sure that all European and international help that is delivered to Ukraine, it goes to the regions where it is really necessary. And I know about examples of absolutely heroic work of European or international volunteers who are together with Ukrainian volunteers, risking their lives, are delivering this international help to the eastern areas, eastern villages and towns. Not only eastern, but in Kharkiv region also, or in the south, Nikolaev region. You can be absolutely sure that international help is delivered to the people who really need this help. Now, again, another very serious agricultural question was raised. Look, if to talk about things which are urgent, of course, our government is doing everything it can, but the question of fuel supplement for agriculture is very serious. And if something, well, at the same time, we know that Europe is doing absolutely that Europe can do. But again, if something can be done additionally to help Ukraine with fuel for agricultural for this agricultural season, every additional help is very useful. Now, already Ukraine, together with the European Union, is trying to establish new logistic corridors for Ukrainian agricultural goods using our railway and European railway facilities. And again, the projects already are designed, and the work already was started by Ukraine and by Ukrainian European partners in European Union. But again, if additional efforts and additional resources can be moved to these logistic projects, it will be very important. And of course, one of colleagues has raised the question of silos. Silos were not under attack. I would say major part of them, of Russian Federation. But we, of course, should be ready that such agricultural facilities will be under attack as soon as they understand that they can damage also this part of infrastructure. Although for today, of course, they are mostly concentrated on attacking Ukrainian cities, towns, attacking civilians, and attacking our army. But we have to understand that on the next step, they also can start attack our agricultural infrastructure. And then, if we all together are successful in creating these new logistic corridors from Ukraine to Europe for agricultural goods, of course, there also should be an opportunity to use European agricultural infrastructure to save Ukrainian agricultural goods. Finishing my remarks, I would like to thank you, colleagues, all countries of European Union and European countries which are not members of European Union, for extremely great help for Ukraine as state, as country, for Ukrainian citizens who are terminally in Europe and who stay in Ukraine. I can tell you, as one of persons who was coordinating international help, humanitarian help, not only humanitarian help, for Ukraine for first, say, a little bit more than 1 month, that one even hardly can calculate these whole amounts of money, whole amounts of tons of help that Europe sent to Ukraine. So thank you very much. Unfortunately, again, I have to finish my remarks with the idea that unfortunately, till victory, till Ukrainian, and it's not only Ukrainian, again, colleagues, it's not Ukrainian victory. It's a victory of the whole civilized world against new Nazis. So till this final victory of civilized world against new Nazis, unfortunately, we will face all these problems that you colleagues and me today have raised in this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair Potorajev. I see also now that we have our standing rapporteur for humanitarian aid connected, so I will also give the floor now to Monica Silvana Gonzalez, S&D, for 2 minutes. Okay, see if we can come back to Monica. We then continue, and we're running a bit late, so I will have to let my other guests be a bit more strict on the timing, but I will give now the floor to Mr. Valdam Brini and also to Mr. Kapranis for DJ Echo, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I will try to be brief and reply to the questions that are more rather addressed to the Commission. So concerning the S&D question about future budget, I will just give you a figure. Tomorrow, the UN are planning to present the revised flash appeal for Ukraine, and the financial requirements for this appeal will be probably $2.24 billion US dollars, meaning 2.07 euro billion, only to cover the period from June to August. Okay. So to target 8.7 million people across Ukraine out of the 15.7 million in need. So we're talking about 2.07 billion for 3 months, and the ECHO annual budget is 1.5 euro billion. So to serve all the humanitarian crises in the world. This is just to give you an idea of the magnitude of this crisis without considering, that will be your next point, all the global impact of this crisis, not only on food, but on energy, refugee crisis in Europe, and so many other, unfortunately, spillover effects. So the Commission is really working and try to mobilize all the possible resources that are available. As I said before, we had an initial allocation. Consider that, to give you an idea, the budget for Ukraine before was, for the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, between 2014 and 2021 was around 25 million per year on average. And we moved already from a first allocation of 93 million plus 50 million now, so we are now at 143 million. And of course, we are indeed looking to increase this allocation, but it's not easy because, as you rightly pointed out, it's of course a huge financial burden. I don't know if there will be a pledging conference. I guess that at some point there will be. There was already the Stand Up for Ukraine event, which was indeed a fundraising campaign. There was also an event on Moldova, and I expect indeed that the international donor community will mobilize even further, because indeed, in order to respond to these needs, much more money, unfortunately, is needed. Concerning the question on cash and cash assistance, so we just received the latest figure, and according to the latest figure, 232,000 people are, as of today, reached by multipurpose cash assistance. 2 or 3 points. First of all, the numbers are growing by the day. As you can see, you had a figure of 150,000, and the numbers are already growing, and they will grow by the day. And they are growing. In the first phase, they may look a little bit slow, but because cash, multipurpose cash transfer is a modality that requires an establishment of a platform. It requires the collection of data. It's just 2 days ago we had the information that the Ukrainian government issued a ministerial decree that allow now for humanitarian purpose the government to share, of course under condition, the data of registered internally displaced people to humanitarian organizations that are implementing multipurpose cash transfer platform. And it's also important to highlight that our partners are working closely with the Ukrainian government to avoid a parallel system, but work in synergy with the Ukrainian government. We don't want to create too many different strands of cash assistance that can then risk to be ineffective or produce, I don't know, double payments or overlapping. So it takes some time at the beginning, but the idea is to set up a strong system together with the Ukrainian government that can then be sustainable. And last but not least, let's not forget that, of course, multipurpose cash assistance is a very important modality, especially where markets are functioning, but it's not the only modality. Out of our basic need assistance, of course, our partners provide food, provide vouchers where it's not possible to provide direct cash assistance, and other forms. So I think that this is a system that indeed is now rolling out, and for sure the numbers you will see that will increase, and in full also, in order also to ensure accountability and transparency of this aid for European taxpayers and all the other donors. Thank you.
Thank you. I also give the floor then to Mr. Kapranis.
Thank you. No, I have nothing to complete. I think my colleague Alessandro covered all the points and explained the details behind the cash assistance. Thank you.
Thank you. Move and then I give the floor to Mr. Marek Stys.
Thank you. I would like to comment on 3 issues. At first, to underline the issue of the decontamination and necessity of demining mentioned by Mr. Potrayev. It's absolutely true that this has to be done before any infrastructural works begin, and this issue is also influencing the agriculture production. We have seen these examples in Chernihiv, how UXOs mines are affecting the small scale farming in there. So the demining in general is extremely important. Second question was around the convoys, and I would like to particularly to the hard-to-reach areas and the besieged cities or cities under the attack. The issue is not a logistical one; it's a safety and security issue. We are working with the UN OCHA on this humanitarian notification system, and the sad reality is that while we have a blanket approval from Ukrainian government to access these areas, obviously, Russian side is almost notoriously rejecting all these access. So we can deliver the assistance, as I said, but we cannot do it safely at the moment. Otherwise, we would be risking the lives of our staff and the staff of our partners. And thirdly, there was the issue raised on potential exploitation of women and children fleeing the Ukraine. I would like to assure you that this issue is definitely under the radar of the responding organizations. My organization is working on this issue, particularly in Moldova. But the issue is wider for any refugees with any specific vulnerabilities. Definitely need to be under a very specific scrutiny. I would also like to mention that we have seen some growing tensions between the hosting and refugee or displaced populations. It might be both in Western Ukraine and in the neighboring countries, which is a sort of an inherent dynamic of these situations. So we have to be really careful to do at the maximum to manage this relationship wisely. Also focus our attention on the needs of the hosting population, and basically make sure that these relations don't spin out of the control as we have seen in other crises. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor then to Ms. Alexandra Boivin.
Thank you very much. 2 points on my end. One with respect to sexual and gender-based violence, and just to confirm that this issue is very much at the heart of our dialogue with the parties to the conflict. There are some very clear rules about this issue, and so I just want to confirm that that is something that we raise proactively. For us, we don't need to see evidence of it to be proactive about this issue. We know it arises in every conflict situation, sadly. The second point was to respond to the very direct question regarding our presence in the Russian Federation and our intentions to work for the protection and assistance of persons having fled Ukraine. And there I just wanted to confirm that we are in discussions with the Russian authorities about the possibility to assist these populations. We already have been doing so together with the Russian Red Cross. The question about whether we can confirm that people were forcibly displaced at this moment is one that I cannot answer. I cannot confirm, I cannot deny that, but it's certainly an issue of concern. We are in direct contact with the Ukrainian authorities about this issue as well, and I just want to say to this audience that it's something that we feel mandated to respond to. We're talking about people who are protected by the 4th Geneva Convention, and we certainly have the intention to do what we can to extend our support to whoever is covered by the conventions in this conflict. finally, just a point to perhaps to reinforce what my colleague from PIN mentioned just now about the protection needs of people in third countries, so refugees in third countries, and just to say that our presence there, together with Red Cross societies, is also very much about looking at protection needs and being attuned to the specific vulnerabilities of this population, looking also at their needs to be connected and remain connected with their families back home. So thank you very much once again for the opportunity to address you.
Thank you, and thank you to all our guest speakers who has provided us with these different interventions and, of course, information, and especially also from the ground, and all the efforts that is also being done from Commission. Let me also particularly thank Chair Potorajev for taking the time to address our committee. And let me be clear, of course, firstly, that I would like to strongly underline that the Committee on Development and the European Parliament as a whole stands in solidarity with Ukraine and will continue to call for strong humanitarian support for our Ukrainian friends. And secondly, yes, we do see, of course, that humanitarian situation is not getting better, particularly considering just the recent developments in Donbass, which once again shows Putin's absolute lack of respect for international humanitarian law. And we will continue to condemn in strongest possible terms Russia's violation of international humanitarian law and call for humanitarian access to civilians in need. And thirdly, it is clear that the European Union must stand ready to increase our humanitarian funding to meet the rising humanitarian needs. And I think you can count on our committee in that regard. By that, we will put an end for this agenda point today, and thank you all.